You know, I still remember that smell, even now, 5 years later. The smell of yeast and damp Oregon rain and old wood, all mixed up with the faint, persistent scent of failure. That's what Redwood Creek always smelled like to me. It wasn't just the failing bakery, the Hearthstone, where I grew up. It was the whole darn town. Like everything was just waiting for the last piece of infrastructure to rust away, and for us all to pack up and go. My name is Caleb Thorne, and for 17 years, my entire world revolved around my grandmother, Elspeth, and the simple, brutal arithmetic of a small-town bakery. Revenue minus costs equals not enough. I loved baking, don't get me wrong, I truly did. There's a kind of quiet magic in watching flour and water and time turn into something meaningful, something real. But I wanted the bright lights, the big city kitchens, the places where my skills would be celebrated, not just survived. I wanted out. I feared being trapped there, becoming another ghost in the damp Pacific Northwest fog, just like everyone else who stayed. The day it all changed, the day I got my unwilling call to adventure, was a Tuesday. It was gray, naturally. Elspeth was trying to haul a 100-pound sack of rye up the basement stairs because we were too proud and too broke to pay for a delivery guy to do it, and she just stumbled. A sharp crack, a yelp, and then nothing but the sound of rye grains scattering like tiny, dry tears on the concrete floor. Nothing fatal, thank God, but a serious break. Suddenly she was in the hospital, and I was standing in her kitchen, surrounded by the silence of 2 generations of debt, holding the entire, collapsing world of the Hearthstone in my sweaty 17-year-old hands. The bank sent the first letter 2 days later. It was polite, utterly devoid of mercy, and gave us 30 days. 30 days to turn a trickle of sales into a torrent, or they'd take the land. I tried. Oh, how I tried. I watched YouTube tutorials on marketing. I whipped up trendy matcha croissants, which, let me tell you, Redwood Creek does not appreciate. I even created an Instagram account for the bakery, hashtagging small town charm, which felt like the biggest, most cynical lie I'd ever told. The locals walked in, sniffed suspiciously at my artisanal efforts, bought a plain white loaf and walked out. I was failing fast, and that old familiar panic, the fear of being permanently stuck and responsible for the final ruin of my family's legacy, it was paralyzing. I almost gave up right there. I pictured myself just locking the door, driving away, and sending Elspeth a postcard saying, "Oh, sorry, I tried." But one night, while rooting through the back of an unused storage cupboard, a place I'd avoided for years because it was dusty and full of old guilt, my hand brushed against something small, wrapped tightly in a canvas rag. It was a ledger, not the kind you use for finances, but the kind a true baker uses. A recipe journal, bound in leather and filled with Elspeth's mother's elegant, spidery handwriting. And on the very last page, written in ink so faded it was barely visible, was a single cryptic entry. The Redwood Starter. Use the heart of the ancient grain. Let the mountain breathe. I knew what it was instantly. It was the legendary, almost mythical sourdough starter that everyone in Redwood Creek whispered about. The one that supposedly made the bread so perfect it saved the bakery during the Great Depression. The Redwood Starter. Finding that entry was my mentor, my first guiding light, but it only led to more frustration. What was the ancient grain? Where did the mountain breathe? I was a modern kid. I wanted a QR code, not an existential riddle. This is where the antagonist steps in, and trust me, every great story needs a villain who isn't just evil, but who represents everything you hate about yourself. Enter Victor Vic Sterling. Vic had just opened the Artisan Grind down the highway, a sleek minimalist coffee and pastry chain that looked like it belonged in a magazine, not in our rusty town. He offered clean lines, imported everything, and most importantly, he offered cash. He'd been subtly buying up everything, the old timber mill, the unused general store, and most recently he'd approached Elspeth about buying the Hearthstone. She'd always refused him with a sharp glare and a simple, "Not for sale, Mr. Sterling." Now he walked into my failing bakery, not even bothering to look at my subpar matcha croissants, and he leaned against my counter, hands tucked into the pockets of his designer jeans. "Caleb," he said, his voice smooth and oily, "how's your grandmother doing?" Terrible shame, that accident. Look, kid, I'll cut to the chase. I know you got the bank on your neck. I'm offering you double the asking price for the property. Don't worry about the business, I'll level the place and build something useful. I gripped the counter so hard my knuckles turned white. It's not for sale, Vic, it's my grandmother's. He chuckled, a low, condescending sound. Is it, though? Or is it a liability? You want to be a big city baker, right? This old ruin is just chaining you here. Take the money, get out. Let me put this place out of its misery. That was the line, misery. He didn't just want the property. He wanted to erase the history, the struggle, the very essence of Redwood Creek that I simultaneously loved and loathed. I looked down at the handwritten ledger I was still holding. Get out, Vic, I said, finally finding my voice. The Hearthstone is closed to people who think history is disposable. That was my crossing of the first threshold. I had refused the easy way out, Vic's money, and committed to the quest, though I still had no idea how to win. To solve the riddle of the Redwood starter, I had to do the one thing I'd spent my entire youth avoiding. Talk to the old-timers, the people who stayed. I sought out Mrs. Petrov, a woman who looked like she was knitted from the same gray yarn as the fog itself, and who lived in a cabin halfway up the mountain. She was the gatekeeper to the town's secrets. I showed her the ledger. She didn't look at me. She looked through me, her eyes seeing the ghosts of the past. The ancient grain, Caleb. That's the Yarrow Creek wheat. Only grows on the north slopes, only on land that hasn't been chemically touched in 50 years. Then came the punch to the gut, the setback. She paused, looking genuinely sorrowful. Vic Sterling bought that whole slope last month. Says he's going to turn it into a vineyard. That was the true midpoint. This wasn't a business competition. It was a battle for the soul of the town. Vic wasn't just trying to beat me. He was cornering the market on history itself. He was deliberately removing the essential ingredient. He knew about the legend, and he was making sure I couldn't recreate it. My first thought was rage. My second was fear. My third, thanks to Mrs. Petrov, was a breakthrough. The mountain breathe, she whispered, means it needs air. The starter, Caleb, it's not the flower. It's the yeast. The wild yeast that lives on the bark of the old redwoods up high. I spent 3 days climbing, scraping bark, mixing tiny batches, and failing. I was exhausted, bruised, and about to give up when I finally found the perfect spot. A hollow log overlooking the whole town, where a stream of pure, cold water trickled down. The place where the mountain breathed. I mixed the final starter there, using a tiny, hoarded handful of the precious Yarrow Creek wheat my grandmother had stashed away years ago. It worked. Oh my God, it worked. The starter came to life, not with a whimper, but with a roar. It smelled clean, powerful, and utterly unique. The final confrontation, the climax, happened exactly on day 30. The bank manager, Mr. Jenkins, was due at noon. Vic Sterling, smelling desperation like a shark smells blood, showed up at 11:30. All smiles and a new, thicker checkbook. Last chance, Caleb, Vic purred, spreading the papers on the counter, next to my freshly baked loaves of the Redwood starter bread. I'll give you 3 times the debt. You can't recreate a miracle, kid. You're just a kid. I looked at the bread. It was the deepest amber I'd ever seen, with a crust that crackled like dry leaves under fire, and an internal crumb that shimmered. It wasn't just bread. It was an argument. It was a history book you could eat. No, Vic, I said, leaning over the counter, my voice firm and low. I couldn't recreate a miracle. I could only bake with one. He frowned, then his eyes narrowed as he noticed the crowd. The entire town of Redwood Creek, Mrs. Petrov, the timber guys, the retired postmaster, even the grumpy old librarian. They were all silently lined up outside, peering through the window. Word had spread that the Thorn Boy was attempting the legendary bread. Mr. Jenkins walked in right on time, looking miserable and official. Vic quickly stepped in front of him, trying to control the narrative. Mr. Jenkins, this is purely ceremonial. I'm taking the property. Caleb here has a minor emotional attachment, but he knows better than to let nostalgia cost him his future. I ignored Vic completely. I looked at Mr. Jenkins and then, crucially, I looked out at the faces of the people who were my neighbors, my community. Mr. Jenkins, I said, placing the Redwood starter loaf on the counter between the bank manager and the antagonist's checkbook. The Hearthstone is late on its payments, yes. but a business is valued by its assets. I would like to offer two things as collateral. First, this bread. It's made with the legendary redwood starter, a recipe lost to this town for 60 years. Second, the entire next 2 years of its projected sales secured by these gentlemen. I motioned to the door. The postmaster, a man named George who hadn't smiled since 1998, stepped forward and held up a thick, notarized document. "We all bought into Caleb's idea," George announced, his voice surprisingly strong. "He's making the miracle bread again. We, the citizens of Redwood Creek, have agreed to collectively buy $20,000 worth of gift certificates right now, in advance, to ensure the Hearthstone gets back on its feet. We don't need your chain stores, Sterling. We need our bread." Vic Sterling's face was a study in controlled rage. A perfect cinematic defeat. He had bought the land. He had cornered the market on the grain, but he had forgotten the one ingredient you couldn't buy with money: community. "This is ridiculous," Vic spat. "You're taking a sentimental loan from a bunch of fog-addled old people based on bread? A starter? You think you can sell this rustic nonsense to the modern world, Caleb? You'll be back here in 6 months begging for my check." "Maybe," I replied, grabbing a knife and slicing the perfect loaf down the middle. The sound was deafeningly crisp. I handed half to Mr. Jenkins, who immediately took a bite. His eyes widened. "But for today, Vic," I finished, a small, genuine smile creeping onto my face, "I'm only concerned with selling it to the people who actually call this place home. And right now, my home is definitely not for sale." Mr. Jenkins, still chewing, shook his head. "The advance payment is unconventional but legitimate. The bank will restructure the loan. The Hearthstone is secure." Vic didn't say a word. He just balled up his check and stalked out, his polished Italian shoes kicking up dust from the ancient wooden porch. It was the most satisfying moment of my life. I had done it. I had saved the bakery. I had become the hero of the story, the kid who chose tradition over trend, heart over hurry, and community over corporate cash. I was no longer a ghost. I was the anchor of the Hearthstone. But here's the controversial part, the part I think about every day, the part that doesn't fit neatly into a feel-good ending. I saved the town with a secret. The redwood starter is the most powerful thing I own. I now have the ability to make bread that is objectively better than anything else within a 50-mile radius. I could have bottled that starter, branded it, and sold it online for a fortune, achieving my big city dreams my own way. Instead, I taught Mrs. Petrov how to maintain it. I started teaching the local kids the old baking ways. I shared the miracle with a town that, honestly, barely noticed the place was failing until the bank showed up. I gave away my leverage, my golden ticket. Was that courage? Or was it fear in disguise? The fear of truly succeeding on my own terms, outside the comfort of my small world. By staying, by becoming the anchor, did I trade my big city future for a life I always claimed to hate? The town is saved, yes, and my grandmother is healing. But sometimes, late at night, I look at the redwood starter bubbling away, and I wonder if I was meant to save the community, or if I was meant to use the miracle to save myself. That's the choice we all face, isn't it? The pull between responsibility to the past and ambition for the future. The Hearthstone is thriving now, but I'm still here, still 17, just changed. I made my choice, but I don't know if it was the right one, just the necessary one. So what about you? If you were Caleb, standing on that porch, holding the one secret that could change your life forever, a secret that belonged to your family, but was vital to your entire community, would you have shared it? Would you have stayed? Or would you have used the momentum to finally leave? Where does true justice lie when money and history collide? I want to know your take on this. Seriously, drop a comment below. Tell me if I was a fool or a hero. And hey, if you liked hearing this story, hit that subscribe button. It helps keep the oven warm, so to speak. Thanks for listening.